The train slowed before the coast came into view, as if reluctant to deliver me to what waited there. Through the window, the sky hung low and heavy, the sea a dull sheet of pewter that seemed to swallow the light whole. I pressed my forehead to the glass and let the cold seep into my skin. The closer I got to the house, the more my mother's voice began to sound like memory instead of a person. She'd been gone 3 months. Long enough for condolences to lose their freshness, long enough for her absence to start feeling permanent. I had delayed this trip as long as I could, sorting her estate, selling the house, dividing what was left of a life spent in secrets. But grief has a way of waiting for you in the places you avoid most. When I stepped off the train, the wind met me like an old acquaintance with unfinished business. The air smelled of salt, wet stone, and something faintly metallic, the scent of rusted gates and old regret. I walked the 2 miles to the house because the cab driver said the road was washed out, though I suspected he just didn't like going near it. The house stood at the edge of the cliff, the same way I remembered it from childhood, quiet, hunched, and watching. Its shutters flapped weakly against the wind, and the once white paint had faded to the color of forgotten letters. I unlocked the door with the key I'd kept on a chain since I was 15 and stepped into the stillness. It smelled exactly the same, lavender and turpentine. My mother had been a painter, not a famous one, but known enough in our small town to have her work hang in the local gallery. People would nod at her in the market, say, "Lovely exhibition this year, Mrs. Rowan," and she'd smile politely, as if each compliment were a debt she had to repay later in silence. She painted everything except people. As a child, I used to ask why, and she'd always say the same thing. Because people never stay still long enough to be seen properly. At the time, I thought she meant it literally. Now, standing in that house again, I wasn't so sure. The rooms looked smaller, as if time had eaten the corners. Dust floated in the light like restless ghosts. I set my bag down in the hallway and began the practical work of returning to someone else's life, opening windows, gathering mail, taking inventory of what grief had left behind. In the studio, the smell of oil paint was stronger, almost sweet. The last painting she'd been working on stood unfinished on the easel, a landscape of the sea at dawn, all gray and gold and waiting. Her brushes were still in a jar, stiff with color. I ran my fingers along the edge of the canvas. On the back, written in her precise handwriting, were the words, "Begin again." It was the kind of thing she'd say when I failed at something. She'd never been gentle, but she'd always been kind in her own way. "Don't start over," she'd tell me. "Begin again." Starting over is pretending it didn't happen. Beginning again is remembering it did. I smiled despite myself. The attic was the last room I went to. I hadn't been there in years, not since the day she told me it was off limits. "There's nothing up there for you, Amelia," she'd said, her tone sharp enough to close every question. But grief gives you permission the living never do. I found the attic key taped under the kitchen drawer, right where she used to hide the spare house key. The lock stuck at first, then gave way with a tired sigh. The air inside was thick with dust and old wood. Sunlight leaked through the single window in thin stripes, illuminating a world preserved in silence. There were trunks, crates, rolls of canvas tied with twine, and paintings. Dozens of them, stacks leaning against the wall, some covered with sheets. Others turned to face the floor as if ashamed. I pulled one forward and wiped the dust from its frame. A harbor scene, familiar brushwork, her muted palette of grays and blues. But beneath her signature, faintly visible, was something else. A set of initials, scratched so lightly I thought at first they were cracks in the varnish. EMI frowned. My mother's name was Margaret Rowan, no E curiosity sharpened. I began moving through the others. Most were unsigned. A few had the same faint mark, EM carved into the wood rather than painted. It wasn't her hand. It was rougher, urgent. Then, behind a stack of smaller frames, I found it. A large painting turned backward against the wall. The canvas was covered in dust, its back darkened by age. I set it upright and turned it over. At first, it didn't look like much, just another landscape. But then, as I stepped back, I saw the faint outline of a woman's figure standing near the shoreline. The details had faded, almost erased by time, but something about the posture, the tilt of the head, it was her, my mother. You could feel the love in it. The kind of love that watches, that memorizes, that knows. I flipped the canvas around again, heart pounding. And there it was, carved deep into the wooden frame. The letters unmistakable this time, Amelia Rowan, my name. Beneath it, in strong, deliberate strokes, another line, Elias Moreau. I didn't know the name then. But something in me shifted, an old door opening quietly in my chest. Downstairs, I searched her old letters, journals, sketchbooks, anything that might mention the name. Nothing. Not one reference to anyone named Elias. No letters. No photographs, no records of a friend, mentor, or lover by that name. When I finally sat down, the sun had already begun to set. The house felt different now. Not haunted, exactly, but aware. In the silence, I spoke the name out loud. Elias Moreau. The sound of it startled me, like the house had been waiting to hear it again. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the faint carving. The way the letters of my name curved as if written by someone who knew me before I was even real. I thought of all the times I'd asked my mother about my father. She'd always say the same thing, calm but distant. He died before you were born. It was an accident. That's all you need to know. And I had believed her, because believing her was easier than wondering. But now, sitting in the dark of her house, surrounded by paintings that seemed to be hiding something, I began to wonder if accident was just another word for secret. In the morning, I called the gallery where my mother used to exhibit. The curator, a kind woman named Margaret Hale, remembered me immediately. "Amelia," she said, "I'm so sorry about your mother. She was a force?" "She was," I said. "There's something I need your help with." When I told her about the painting, about the signature, there was a long pause. "Elias Moreau?" She repeated. "Are you sure?" "Yes." Another pause. Then quietly, "Amelia, that's impossible. Why?" "Because Elias Moreau has been dead for almost 30 years. And because if you have a painting signed by him, it shouldn't be in your attic. It should be in a museum." The line crackled. "Do you know who he was?" she asked. "No, but I think I need to." Her voice softened. "Then you should come see me tomorrow. There's something you need to look at." That night, I walked back into the attic. The air felt different now, charged. I turned the painting toward the light and studied it again. The woman on the shore seemed clearer now, as if time had peeled back a layer, and on the horizon, just barely visible, was another figure, smaller, distant, watching. I hadn't noticed it before, a man, standing alone at the edge of the same sea that waited below this house. And for the first time in my life, I realized how little I truly knew about where I came from. I arrived at the gallery early, before it opened. The street was still wet from dawn rain, slick and shining, and the smell of coffee drifted from the cafe next door. For a moment, I just stood on the pavement, watching my reflection blur in the glass door. A woman half there, half not, carrying the kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from knowing too much and too little all at once. When Margaret Hale finally arrived, she greeted me with that small, careful smile people reserve for the grieving. "You look like your mother," she said softly, unlocking the door. She used to come here early, too. Always said light was kinder before noon. Inside, the gallery smelled like dust and varnish, with the faint hum of a heating system older than both of us. The walls were lined with muted landscapes, portraits, still lifes, fragments of people's obsessions preserved in color. I followed Margaret through the echoing space, my boots squeaking against the polished floor. "I didn't want to say too much on the phone," she said as we reached her office. "I thought it better if you saw for yourself." She pulled out a flat box from a drawer, wrapped in brown paper. Her hands trembled just slightly as she untied the string. When she lifted the cover, the scent of linseed oil and thyme spilled into the air. Inside was a small photograph, black and white, and a yellowed newspaper clipping. She slid them toward me. "This is Elias Moreau." The photograph showed a man in his 40s, maybe 50s, sharp features softened by melancholy, eyes too alive for the stillness of the picture. There was something familiar about him I couldn't name. He wore a painter's apron, his hands streaked with pigment. Behind him, an unfinished canvas leaned against the wall, a study of the sea under a bruised sky. The article was dated 1989. Renowned artist. Elias Moreau missing. Last seen near the port of Le Havre. The text below spoke of a man whose genius was shadowed by instability, whose final works had turned more personal, obsessively centered on a woman whose identity remains unknown. "They never found him," Margaret said quietly. "Some say he drowned. Others think he ran. His last known address was in Paris, but after that, nothing." I stared at the image until my throat tightened. "And my mother? She never mentioned him?" "She didn't need to," Margaret said. "Everyone who knew her knew she'd worked for him once. She modeled for a few of his early studies. That's how she paid her way through art school. But after his disappearance, she stopped painting people entirely." Her words landed like the slow turning of a key. "Wait," I said. "You're telling me my mother knew him?" "Knew him," Margaret repeated, her voice heavy with the weight of history. "And if I may say, she never stopped knowing him. He was informative. The kind of person who leaves their shadow on you long after they're gone." I couldn't speak. My pulse pounded in my ears, each beat echoing the same thought. Why didn't she tell me? Margaret hesitated before continuing. "There's more. I went through our old archives this morning. We have a catalog from an exhibition he did here just before he disappeared. It featured a series of paintings called The Sea Remembers. Most of them were landscapes, except one." She laid a faded exhibition brochure on the table. My mother's name was printed near the bottom. Model, Margaret Rowan. The painting beside it was a portrait, the same woman I'd seen on the canvas in my attic, standing at the shoreline. My mother, younger, luminous, real, and next to the portrait's title in small cursive, "For A." My stomach turned. "Who's A?" I asked, Margaret's eyes softened. "That's the question, isn't it?" The next few days blurred together. I couldn't stop thinking about the painting, about the hidden name on its back. My name. The connection was too neat, too deliberate. It wasn't just art. It was a message. I spent hours online, searching for any mention of Elias Moreau beyond the same recycled paragraphs. His paintings were scattered across Europe, galleries in Paris, Marseille, Brussels. The rest were in private collections, their locations unlisted. One night, buried in an archive of art journals, I found a quote attributed to him. "Art is memory that refuses to forget." I read it 3 times before realizing my hands were shaking. I booked a ticket to Paris the next morning. Margaret tried to talk me out of it. "There's nothing left there, Amelia. It's been 30 years. "Then let me prove that," I said. Paris. The city felt different this time. Not romantic, not cinematic. Just vast. Too full of other people's ghosts. The air smelled of coffee, diesel, and rain. And the cobblestones glistened like secrets. I followed the addresses I'd found. An old studio in Montmartre, a gallery long since closed, a cafe where he'd supposedly sketched on napkins between cigarettes. Each place felt like an echo. The studio was now a boutique. The owner, a woman in her 60s, smiled politely when I explained. "Moreau? Ah, yes. The painter. My father rented this place to him. He said the man painted like he was running from something." "Do you know what happened to him?" She shrugged. "One day he left a painting behind. Said it was for the landlord's daughter. My father sold it years ago. But he always said there was something strange about it. The name on the back." My chest tightened. "A name?" "Yes." She frowned, thinking. "A woman's name. He said it was carved, not signed. I remember because it frightened him a little. He said it looked like a confession. That night, I went to the Musée d'Orsay. The rain had turned the city into a watercolor, reflections bleeding together under streetlights. Inside the museum, everything was too bright, too clean. But in a corner of one wing, a temporary exhibit on forgotten artists, I found it, a small painting, unsigned, labeled Unknown Artist, French School, late 20th century. But I knew that brushstroke. The horizon stretched across the canvas in a way only my mother could have described. The sea pretending to be calm. And in the lower corner, half buried under a wash of color, I saw it again. The faint initials. EMI reached out, my fingers hovering just above the glass. The docent noticed my stillness and came over. Beautiful piece, isn't it? Supposedly connected to Moreau's missing works, but the provenance is unconfirmed. Connected how? She tilted her head. There's a rumor he hid something behind his final canvases. Letters, maybe. Or sketches. The restorers never found any. But every collector still checks, just in case. I smiled faintly. Sometimes they're just looking in the wrong places. That night I couldn't sleep. I walked along the Seine until dawn, the wind biting through my coat. Every bridge seemed to whisper the same question. What are you really looking for? I thought of my mother's silence, of her careful life built around absence, of the way she painted the sea over and over, as if trying to find something in it that wouldn't let her go. And for the first time, I wondered if the truth wasn't that my father had died, but that he had been erased. The next morning, I received an email from Margaret. She had found something. An old dealer in Marseille claims to have handled one of Moreau's final works. He remembers your mother's name. He's still alive. His name is Bernard Lefebvre. I read the message 3 times, heart pounding, a direction. A name, finally, something real. When I boarded the southbound train that afternoon, the light was fading again, the same gray-gold dusk from my mother's painting. I watched the landscape blur by, fields giving way to sea giving way to memory, and I realized that whatever waited for me in Marseille wasn't just about him. It was about her, about all the things she'd never said because love, in her hands, had always been half paint and half prayer. As the train curved along the coastline, I whispered to the window, more to myself than to anyone else. I'm coming to find you, whoever you were, and whoever I am because of you. The reflection that stared back looked like someone else entirely, someone finally ready to be seen. The train to Marseille swayed like an exhausted lullaby. I watched the sea from the window, blue-gray, endless, indifferent. The sky above it was the same color as the one in my mother's last painting. Every mile I traveled south, it felt like the past was pulling me closer, not further away. The man I was going to see, Bernard Lefebvre, had been a name on a screen for only a few hours, but he already felt like a key I'd been carrying without knowing the lock. Margaret's email had been brief. Old dealer, retired. Says he remembers both Elias Moreau and your mother. Lives near the old harbor in Marseille. Be gentle. He's in his 80s, and some memories don't like being woken up. When the train slowed into the station, the afternoon light had turned copper. I walked out into the bustle of the city, the smell of salt and diesel, the shouts of vendors, the soft clink of ropes on masts. Everything smelled like something ending and beginning at once. His address led me through narrow alleys that twisted like veins. The door was an old wooden one, blue paint peeling in strips. I knocked once, twice, then heard a shuffling sound inside. "Come in," a voice called, raspy, old but not weak. The room smelled of turpentine, books and something sweet, maybe pipe tobacco or memory. Canvases leaned against the walls, not for display but for companionship. An old man sat by the window, light slanting across his face. His hair was white, his hands stained with paint. "You're Amelia," he said before I could introduce myself. "I saw your mother once. I see her in you now." I hesitated. "You knew her?" He smiled faintly. Everyone who worked with Elias knew her. She was the only one who made him paint the world softer. Sit, I did. He poured tea from a pot that looked older than both of us. I was his dealer for almost 10 years. Sold his work to people who thought art could make them holy. He hated it. He used to say, "They want to own my ghosts, Bernard." But ghosts can't be owned. Did you know what happened to him? I asked quietly. Bernard looked at me for a long moment before answering. He disappeared, officially, but not really. He left. There's a difference. He turned his gaze toward the sea outside the window. He wanted to leave the noise behind. The collectors, the critics, the fame. Said it was killing what he actually wanted to say. He left a few paintings behind, some unfinished. One of them was of a woman. Your mother. I felt my throat tighten. He loved her. He did, Bernard said softly. But not the way most men love. He painted her as if he were trying to convince the universe she was real. I let the silence stretch. Outside, the harbor bells rang once, then again, like the slow counting of time. Then he reached behind him and pulled out a small wooden box. Its edges were worn, the brass latch green with age. I kept this, he said. He told me to return it to her if she ever came back. She never did. Maybe it belongs to you now. He slid it across the table. Inside, nestled in a layer of faded cloth, was a single photograph. A woman standing by the sea, her hair whipped by the wind. My mother. Behind her, a man, holding a sketchbook. Elias. I recognized him from the picture Margaret had shown me, on the back of the photograph, written in the same hand that had signed the painting. For M, and for the child who will one day understand what I meant by color. Beneath it, something else, a folded scrap of paper, brittle and yellowed. I opened it carefully. There is another painting, not in a gallery, not for sale, hidden, for her, for the truth that must sleep until it's safe to wake. If she ever finds it, tell her to look behind the horizon. I looked up, confused. Behind the horizon? Bernard smiled, that kind of smile that knows it's giving away too much. Elias loved riddles, but in his language, the horizon meant the edge of the canvas. He often wrote notes, messages, even entire letters behind his works. Secrets under paint? My heart pounded. You're saying he hid something inside the painting? I'm saying, he said, eyes glinting, you should look where art isn't meant to be seen. I took the night train back to my mother's house. The storm began somewhere past Avignon and followed me all the way north. By the time I arrived, the sky was bruised and the wind howled like something remembering. I went straight to the attic. The painting waited there in the dark, patient, the air thick with dust and time. I pulled it into the light, turned it over. The carved letters were still there. Amelia Rowan, Elias Moreau. I ran my fingers along the edge of the canvas. That's when I felt it, a ridge, faint but wrong. The fabric wasn't flush with the frame. Something had been sealed inside. I fetched a small knife from the kitchen. My hands shook as I pried the staples loose, one by one. The sound, that slow metallic groan, felt like opening a grave. The back panel gave way. And there, hidden between the layers of canvas and backing board, was a small envelope. It was thin, yellowed, tied with a red ribbon. My name was written on the front in delicate cursive, not my mother's handwriting. His. I untied the ribbon and pulled out the first letter. My dearest one, if you are reading this, then what I could not say has found its way to you. There are things color cannot confess, no matter how many times the brush returns to the same line. Your mother and I met when she was still learning how to see. She did not paint. She translated light. I loved her because she could see beauty even in ruin. But the world does not forgive love that arrives out of order. I was married then, and the scandal would have devoured her. So we hid. When you were born, I came once, only once, to the hospital. I held you for less than a minute. She named you after the color of dawn, and I understood then what she had given up. I painted to keep you both alive. I left clues in the work because art survives what men cannot. If the world ever tells you you are alone, look for my hand in the light. It will be there always. I couldn't breathe. My mother's silence. His disappearance. My name carved into the frame. It all fit suddenly, horribly, perfectly. He was alive when I was born. He saw me. He left because staying would have destroyed her, and she never told me because loving him had cost her everything once. She couldn't risk it again. There were more letters, half a dozen at least. Each one a confession, a memory, a plea. He wrote about the smell of her hair, the way she hummed when she painted, the sound of my heartbeat the day I was born. He described the painting I'd found as his last promise. If I could not give her my name, I would give it to you. I don't remember when I started crying, only that it felt different from every other time before. Not sharp, not violent. Just steady, like rain that had been waiting for years to fall. The storm outside grew louder. The attic window rattled in its frame. I pressed the letters to my chest and whispered his name into the dark. For a moment, I swore I could smell paint, fresh, alive, and then, through the noise of the rain, I thought I heard it. Faint, almost a breath. Begin again. The same words my mother had written on the back of her final canvas. Maybe they had both been speaking to me all along. The next morning, I laid the letters out carefully across the kitchen table. The house felt lighter, as if it had exhaled. The sky outside had turned clear again, the kind of blue that only comes after storms. I knew what I had to do next. Elias's last note had mentioned a place. The sea that remembers. Bernard's words echoed. He left. Not disappeared. Left. And if he had left, maybe he hadn't gone far. Maybe somewhere. There was still another painting waiting. The final one. The one he never meant for anyone but me to find. That afternoon, I packed the letters, the photograph, and a small knife. The kind that could lift truth from wood if I had to. Before leaving, I turned back to the attic one last time. The painting glowed in the soft morning light. For the first time, the woman on the shore didn't look like my mother. She looked like me. I arrived in the village 2 days later, a place so small it seemed to cling to the cliffs for balance. The sea below was restless, green and gray, clawing at the rocks as though trying to climb back to something it had lost. The wind smelled of salt and old paint. Bernard had given me an address scribbled on the back of a business card. Maison Blanche, Rue du Phare. The White House by the lighthouse. That's where he went, he'd said. He said he'd paint until the sea remembered him. The road wound upward, narrow and steep. Houses leaned against each other like tired memories, their shutters faded blue, their gardens overgrown. The closer I got, the quieter it became, as if the whole village was holding its breath. The cottage was there at the end of the road, half hidden by ivy, its walls the color of bone. The windows were open, curtains moving softly in the wind. For a long moment, I couldn't move. I had imagined this moment 100 times, but never with the weight of reality pressing against it. I knocked once, then pushed the door open. The smell hit me first. Turpentine, oil, dust. And underneath it, something alive. Salt air, sunlight, the faint sweetness of lavender. The air itself felt like a memory I had stepped into. The main room was full of light. The windows faced the sea, and the walls were covered with paintings. Dozens of them, some finished, others still wet. Landscapes, portraits, abstract storms of color. But one thing tied them all together. Me, not perfectly. Not directly, but fragments of me. A woman's profile, a hand holding a seashell, a child's eyes looking out from a corner of the canvas. Different ages, different versions, as if someone had been painting my life without me ever knowing. I moved from one painting to another, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. In the corner of one, near the edge of a stormy sea, the signature gleamed faintly, EM, and underneath it, written in trembling, almost invisible script, for AM, who carries the light I borrowed. I pressed my fingers to the signature. It was dry, but the paint beneath felt almost warm. Amelia? The voice came from behind me. Old, gentle, uncertain. I turned. He stood in the doorway, Thin but upright, his hair silver and wind-tossed, his clothes spattered with color. His eyes, my eyes, widened as if he were looking at a ghost. Elias Moreau, I said. The name came out more as breath than sound. He blinked once, slowly. Then quietly, "You found me." I didn't know what to say. I had imagined meeting him, rehearsed it in my mind through train windows and sleepless nights, but every version of the conversation vanished in that instant. He took a hesitant step forward. "You look like her. My mother?" He nodded, and me, perhaps, though she would have denied it. "She did," I said. "All my life." "I know." He moved past me toward the window. His hands shook slightly as he set down a brush. "She thought she was protecting you." And perhaps she was. I stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by the proof of his existence. "Why?" I asked. "Why hide me? Why hide yourself?" He didn't turn, because truth destroys the weak before it sets them free. "I wasn't strong then. Neither was she." "That's not an answer," he sighed. "No, it's a wound trying to explain itself." I stepped closer. "You knew about me? You carved my name into that painting." He smiled sadly. "Yes, I wanted you to know you were real, even if I couldn't be the one to tell you." His voice broke on the last word. We sat by the window, the sea below turning silver with evening light. He told me everything slowly, like an artist layering color. He met my mother in Paris when she was still studying. She modeled for his students, quiet, graceful, fiercely private. He fell in love with her the way painters do, first with her light, then with her silence. "She never asked for anything," he said. "Not fame, not promises, just time. And time was the one thing I didn't own. He had a wife then, a life built on appearances. When my mother became pregnant, she wanted to keep me, but he couldn't face the scandal. I told myself I was protecting her," he said, "but I was protecting my cowardice." He looked at me. "I came once to the hospital. She didn't see me. I thought I'd leave when she was asleep. But I looked at you, and I knew I'd never paint anything honest again unless I left the world that made me lie." "So you ran." He nodded. "I left everything. The galleries, the critics, even my own name. I came here. I thought I could paint peace. But peace doesn't come to those who leave storms unfinished." I didn't realize I was crying until he reached for my hand. His fingers were cold but steady. "I watched you grow," he said, "from afar. Bernard sent me photographs sometimes. He thought I didn't know, but I always did. I painted you every year. Birthdays, milestones, things you didn't even know you were living." He gestured to the walls. "You are the story I never told." We sat in silence for a long time, the air filled with the smell of salt and turpentine. "I thought you were dead," I said finally. "I was," he said. "Just not in the way people think." Outside, the sea roared, the waves breaking hard against the cliffs. He stood slowly and walked to a small easel near the corner of the room. A half-finished painting rested there. A woman standing in front of a window, her back turned, her reflection visible in the glass. "The woman's face was mine. I started this the day your mother died," he said. "I thought if I could finish it, maybe I could forgive myself. But I never could get the light right. It's not in the paint, it's in the person." He turned to me. "Maybe you can." I stared at the brush he offered me. "You want me to finish it?" "I want you to see yourself as I do." The brush felt heavier than it should have. I dipped it into the paint, pale gold, the color of early morning. My hand trembled, then steadied. I painted a small stroke across the canvas, catching the reflection in the window, the faint suggestion of sunlight breaking through clouds. The room seemed to hold its breath. He exhaled softly. "There, you've done what I couldn't." I turned to him. "What now?" He smiled, a quiet, tired, peaceful smile. "Now you begin again." Those words, the same ones written on the back of my mother's last painting. He died 3 days later. The doctor said it was his heart. I think it was time. Some souls simply run out of paint. I buried him near the cliffs, beside a small grove of cypress trees that overlooked the sea. The villagers helped me. They seemed to know him not as an artist, but as a quiet man who fed the stray cats and painted until sunset. After the funeral, I went back to the cottage. The light inside had changed. It felt softer, less haunted. On the table was a single envelope, my name written on it in the same steady hand. Inside, "My dearest Amelia, I have left the house and its contents to you. The gallery in Marseille will know what to do with the rest. I hope one day you'll find beauty not in answers, but in the act of searching. Love does not end, it transforms. Into color, into wind, into memory. You are not my legacy. You are my forgiveness. Elias Starr." I stood in the room surrounded by his paintings, the afternoon light spilling through the windows, dust turning to gold in the air. He was gone. My mother was gone. But for the first time, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt connected, through paint, through silence, through everything that had been hidden and finally found. I looked at the unfinished painting on the easel. The light was perfect now. I signed it with my name, not his, not hers. Mine. The days after the funeral felt both endless and invisible. The village carried on as it always had, fishermen calling to one another before dawn, church bells marking hours that seemed older than time, the sea coming and going as if nothing ever really left. But in the little white house on Rue de Fer, the world had changed. It was quiet now, but not empty. The kind of quiet that breathes. I woke every morning before the light and sat by the window with coffee that always went cold before I finished it. I could hear the sea breathing below the cliffs, the steady inhale and exhale that reminded me of my father's final words. You are not my legacy. You are my forgiveness. I didn't know what to do with forgiveness. It's a strange inheritance. It doesn't hang on walls or fill bank accounts. It lingers inside you, waiting to be used. So I stayed. I spent my days cataloging his work for the gallery in Marseille. The collection was vast, landscapes of storms and serenity, portraits of women who seemed half real and half memory. But what struck me most were the self-portraits, dozens of them, in varying stages of completion. Each one different, yet all with the same expression, an ache caught mid-thought, as though he was always trying to find his way back to something he couldn't quite name. One afternoon, while moving a large canvas away from the wall, I noticed another painting hidden behind it, its surface turned inward. I frowned. I'd thought I'd already cataloged everything. It was tall, nearly my height, and heavier than it looked. When I pulled it into the light, dust shimmered in the air like faint gold. The front was covered in a wash of white paint, thick, deliberate, final. But even beneath the layers, I could feel there was something there. I leaned closer, running my hand across the surface. The texture was uneven, ridges beneath the white. The kind of texture left when something has been buried rather than erased. And then I saw it. A small inscription in the corner, carved faintly into the wood. For AR, beneath the light, my initials. I hesitated only a moment before fetching the small knife from the desk drawer. It felt wrong, destructive, but also necessary, like peeling away silence. Slowly, carefully, I began scraping at the paint, layer by layer. The first layer gave way easily, flakes falling like snow. Then came another, thicker one, almost waxy to the touch. I worked for nearly an hour before I saw the first glimpse of color, a soft amber glow beneath the white. When I peeled back more, the image began to reveal itself. A woman, standing before a window, light spilling across her face. It was me, not as I was now, but younger, maybe 10 or 11. My hair wild, my expression open and unguarded. In my hands, a paintbrush, dripping with gold. The same image I'd painted days earlier on his unfinished canvas. I stepped back, breath catching. He had painted me long before I'd ever stood in that room. Before I'd even known who he was. He must have painted it from memory. From hope. From the idea of me. But that wasn't all. Near the bottom corner, beneath the hem of my dress, I saw faint lines, letters, maybe. I brushed away the remaining dust, and there it was, carved into the wood beneath the paint. Elias Moreau, and below it, smaller, almost trembling, as though added later, Amelia Rowan, both names together. Father and daughter, artist and subject, truth and forgiveness. For the first time, I felt what he must have felt, that art wasn't a possession, but a way of remembering what life tries to erase. I sat on the floor, surrounded by flakes of white paint, and cried, not for him, not for her, but for the space between all of us that had finally found its color. That evening, I took the painting outside. The sun was low, setting the sea on fire. I leaned the canvas against the side of the house and watched how the light hit it, the same amber that lived in the paint itself. Behind me, the house creaked softly, as if exhaling after a long-held breath. I whispered to the wind, "You can rest now." It wasn't clear who I was speaking to. Maybe to them. Maybe to myself. I decided to keep the cottage. The gallery would take the rest of the paintings, restore them, exhibit them, tell the story of the artist who vanished and the daughter who found him again. But this one, the hidden portrait, would stay. Some truths aren't meant for the world. Some are meant only to keep us whole. I hung it above the fireplace where the late light touched it every afternoon. The colors shifted through the day, gold at sunrise, blue by noon, soft gray at dusk. It was alive, the way grief becomes alive when it finally learns how to breathe. I began painting again, not like my mother, not like him, like me. I painted the sea, not the sea as it was, but the sea as I remembered it when I was a child, when it felt like everything began and ended in the same breath. I painted light that moved through people instead of around them. I painted small moments, hands holding coffee, windows catching dawn, faces turned toward forgiveness. And on each canvas, somewhere small and hidden, I carved the same two words. Begin again. Months passed. The garden grew wild with lavender. The gulls returned to their nesting cliffs. The house filled with new canvases, new colors, new quiet. One morning, while opening the shutters, I found a small box by the door. No note, no address. Inside, a brush, his brush, and a folded piece of paper. For when the light changes, no signature, but I knew the handwriting. For a long time, I stood there in the doorway, brush in hand, the sea whispering below. Then I smiled, because maybe the light never really changes. Maybe it just moves from one pair of hands to another. That night, I walked to the cliffs. The air was cool, full of stars. I could see the waves catching moonlight, silver and alive. I held the brush over the edge, letting the wind tug at it. Then, gently, I let it go. It fell slowly, gracefully, vanishing into the dark below. A goodbye. A beginning. Both. When I returned to the house, the painting above the fireplace seemed to glow faintly in the dimness. I stood before it for a long time, tracing the lines of my younger self, the ghost of the man who had painted her, the woman I had become standing between them, and I understood finally what my mother had meant when she said people never stay still long enough to be seen properly. Because we are never one thing. We are always shifting between love and loss, between light and shadow, between what we inherit and what we choose to keep. But if you look closely, beneath all the layers, beneath the silence, the secrets, the sorrow, there is always a signature. Sometimes it isn't a name. Sometimes it's a pulse, and mine was still there, alive.